For generations, the public has been controlled through fear. The progression of perceived enemies has evolved over time. We were once told that our enemies were nation-states and we had to duck and cover because the enemy could strike with great devastation at a moment's notice. Now, while this outside threat used to instill fear and bolster the military-industrial complex was very effective, this enemy could only last so long and was merely a stepping stone. The fear of an outside threat later evolved to terrorists who had no borders. This justified military expansionism globally. While these military campaigns were often celebrated with the removal of terrorist leaders, the wars continued as the threat of terror only escalated, and the terrorist leaders were quickly replaced by new villains. We were told they hate us because we're free. And gradually we became less free, as the government erected a police state and a surveillance state to protect us from the very terror threat they created.
Within weeks of 9/11, the Patriot Act was passed in the US with no congressional debate. It allowed unprecedented surveillance with minimal oversight over American citizens. The alternative the government suggested was responsibility for another terrorist attack.
Terror, terrorism, terror, terrorist, terror organization, terrorist attacks, terrorism, terrorist network, terrorist attacks, terrorist group. Terrorists, terrorists, instruments of terror, a terror network, terror cells, terrorists, terrorizing terror and murder, terrorism, terrorists, terrorist, tool of terror and torture.
Now we are told the enemy is invisible yet everywhere. We are told our way of life will never be the same, much like we heard in the aftermath of 9/11, and boy, were they right. The public has been conditioned to live in a state of fear. We have been conditioned to rely on the government as our only solution for safety and security. A solution we've been warned of for hundreds of years. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. It's been said that you cannot invade mainland United States. There would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. So how do you take over a country without firing a shot? Step 1, declare an emergency. Step 2, roll out weaponized propaganda. Step 3, enforce a nationwide lockdown. Step 4, make the public so desperate they will beg for a state-sponsored solution. Step 5, COVID 1984. All to justify freedom as a casualty of war. So what's the next shoe to drop? Where do we go from here? Now, I've been saying for a few months now that we are due for a false flag, and the response has been that either people agree or people are accusing me of being a fearmonger, that I profit from this crisis. I profit financially from this in no way, shape, or form at all whatsoever. Or people say that we're already in a false flag right now. We're experiencing a false flag right now. Now, while this may be true, we must recognize that the stage is set, and the need for another event may be presenting itself as more and more people grow tired of the lockdowns, as more and more people begin to resist. Now, I'm just saying it may be time for the people to be reminded just how much they need the government to protect them in this global crisis, right? The people may need to be reminded how much they need to obey, how they need to stay in line, stay in lockdown, get back inside. Now, the mainstream media has quietly been injecting this train of thought into the discussion by saying that terrorists and or neo-Nazis could use this crisis as an opportunity to carry out an attack. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen 100%, but based on history, it is a real possibility, and 9/11 is the perfect example. While the rubble of the Twin Towers was still smoldering, they were actively trying to rush the Patriot Act through, and they were met with resistance. Well, how did they respond to that resistance? With an anthrax attack, a bio-warfare attack. And they didn't have to kill thousands of people. Fear alone was enough to sell it. So here we are now. People are beginning to resist. The media has injected the idea that terrorists could launch a bio attack during this crisis, and now Bill Gates has come out and said the exact same thing. He said right now we are in phase 1, and phase 2 is a terrorist bio attack. I've never been one to tell people what to think, and I'm not about to start right now, but I would not be surprised if alarm bells are going off in your head right now. And one day, I won't be surprised if I have to refer back to this report and others that I've done recently where these concerns were raised. Now, why is this important? For the same reason that it's important to note that Bill Gates, the Johns Hopkins Center, and the United Nations, both of which Gates funds extensively, ran a pandemic exercise on the exact same day that the World Military Games were holding their opening ceremonies in Wuhan, China, ground zero, simulating a global coronavirus pandemic. This is important for the same reason that it's important to point out that Bill Gates also almost prophetically warned of this exact same scenario taking place of a global health pandemic during a TED Talk in 2015. This is important for the same reason that it's important to point out that Dr. Tony Fauci, who sits on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's Special Leadership Council for their Decades of Vaccination initiative, stated that the Trump administration would be hit with a surprise outbreak back in 2017. Now, if you want, you can say that all of these events were just several different coincidences which just so happen to involve the same groups of people over and over and over in the same exact scenarios which we are currently living out right now. Or you can say that the writing has been on the wall for some time. So what is the end game here? Well, in my opinion, it's global governance delivered through technocracy, which is a scientific dictatorship run by an unelected elite which are ready to roll out a new digital system of control which will be run on 5G, artificial intelligence, biometrics, and the blockchain. Your entire existence will be tracked, traced, monitored, surveilled, regulated, and taxed into submission. So how do we stop it? Well, that is the million-dollar question, but as David Icke pointed out right here on this very channel and on several others, if we do nothing, they win. Okay, so we must resist. Now, if you are presented with a situation that you are not okay with or comfortable with, resist it. Plain and simple, resist it. Be as independent from the system as possible. They've been trying to foster dependence upon this system for generations, trying to make it the easy road out. And once you're dependent upon this system, it owns you. Now, they are already talking about coming to people's homes and taking family members away. Are you okay with this? This coronavirus crisis not only falls in line directly with the United Nations 2030 agenda, it has accelerated it. Now, we are witnessing a pre-packaged global transformation taking place right now, and it's up to you. It's up to all of us to resist it. The time is right now. Where is your line in the sand? Because the level of tyranny you will live under is the exact amount you will put up with.
Well, the idea of a bioterrorist attack is kind of the nightmare scenario. To be ready for pandemic 2, I call this pandemic 1. The idea of a bioterrorist attack is kind of the nightmare scenario. To be ready for pandemic 2, I call this pandemic 1.